if you have your MySQL Workbench open, we're going to start with the table on the left. We're picking a revenue event table. And these are the columns in the table. And the first exercise with the where clause, we're going to be pulling all these fields and all the rows, but we're going to filter the result that we get from our query to only records that have revenue greater than 200. So to do that, we're going to write our query as we normally do, which is a select all, meaning we're pulling all the fields from the table. So in this case, we're pulling from the revenue underscore event table, and we're filtering our result set to show only records that have revenue greater than 200. So I'm going to say where revenue is greater than 200. If I run this query now, it will show me cases where revenue, as you can see, revenue is greater than 200 in all the cases here. I can do the same thing for whatever value I want. I can put this, change it to 1000 and say, give me where revenue is greater than 1000. And we run the same query. Now, as you can see, the revenue amount here is greater than 1000. Now we can use any field in this table to filter our result. So how about we look at a case where we only want transactions where product ID 301 was purchased. In that case, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to select all from revenue event, which is a table we're pulling these records from. And the difference here will be we're going to be choosing the product ID field. So where product ID is equal to 301. So we only want to see all the records in this table where the product ID purchased is 301. And you can see the product ID column here. And you can see it shows us the 301 only. In this topic, we're going to be talking about subqueries, and we'll ask two main questions. First is, what are subqueries? And the next one is how and when to use subqueries. So we're going to be covering these two questions in our MySQL environment. So let's jump into MySQL and look at how to use and when to use subqueries. So the question is, when do subqueries come into play? Well, let's say we have an example where we've been asked to compute the average revenue per customer. From our little understanding of SQL, we'll say we're going to be selecting average revenue from the revenue event table because that's where revenue exists. So if you look to your left here, we have our revenue table, revenue event table, and we can see revenue there. So if the question is to find the average revenue per customer, then we're taking the average of all revenue amounts in that table. So let's take a look at that table real quick. So select all from revenue event. And then let's limit this by 20. So we're taking the first 20 rows of this table. Now, as you can see, we have our customer ID, we have our date, we have our event date, then we have the revenue amounts. So this table, as we've looked at it and ran queries against it, gives us information on every single transaction a customer has. So as you can see, this one customer has 3 different transactions on 3 different days. So if we take an average of all the revenue in this table, then that means we're taking an average of the individual transaction amounts. So it will be something like this. We're just going to say select average revenue from revenue event. And that will give us the average of revenue for all these instances of a revenue event. But what if the question is not that simple? What if the question is for us to find the average for every single customer per product? So meaning for this 420711 customer, for every product that they purchased, we want to sum up the revenue. So we'll get a query that gives us for every customer per product, this is the total sum of revenue. When we do have that number, we now want to compute an average of that sum of revenue. So that means our revenue amount is now going to be bigger because we're not looking at individual transactions anymore. Now we're summing up our revenue per product first. Then we're going to take that revenue, the new revenue amount, and we're now going to compute an average. So what we're asking is, what is the average revenue per customer per product? That's the question. So now we have our new data set. We now want to compute an average of this. This is where subqueries come in. So to do this, I'm just going to put this in parentheses. By enclosing this query in parentheses and give it an alias, say A, and I'm now querying that table. So I'm now saying select average